Hey everybody, welcome to 20Q, 20 Questions with Interesting People, where we learn the origin stories of everyday superheroes in the LGBT community and friends. I am your host, the very handsome Tim Kirk, and this time our guest is writer, public speaker, facilitator, consultant, advocate, and commentator Christian de la Huerta. Christian's most recent book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was released in October 2020 and is the first installment of Calling All Heroes, a three-part series. The book received early high-profile endorsements from singer Gloria Estefan, theologian Matthew Fox, and civil rights activist David Mixner. Hi, Christian.
Hey, very handsome Timmy. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm going to start with our first question, as always, a bit about your background. Where are you originally from, and what was it like?
I was born in Cuba and lived there under a communist regime for the first 10 years of my life. And I'm actually really grateful for the experience for a couple of reasons. You know, we had a TV, but there was no programming really worth watching. So I grew up reading, so developed a lifelong love affair with books. And we also had to invent and create our own games, for which I'm also really grateful. And then, you know, it's like so many things that we take for granted here in the US and in developed countries, like chewing gum, right? Like, what's chewing gum to us? We just put it in our mouth, spit it out, don't even think about it. And we had it good compared to most people because my parents had friends who worked in foreign embassies. Like a few times a year, we'd get a pack of chiclets. Remember the chiclets?
Oh, yes.
And so we'd split it between the kids. You know, I'm one of a large family of kids. I'm one of 9 kids. And we'd chew it all day. And then at the end of the day, we get a glass of water with just a little bit of water, put some toothpaste in it, and stick our gum in there so that it'd be minted the next day, and then hide it so my mom wouldn't throw it out.
Really? Wow. You know, it's funny. I had a friend who was a former boss a long time ago who was originally from Cuba. And he was telling me about his uncle who had one of those cars that just stays in cherry condition because they have to maintain them. And to build a carburetor, he had to find a block of steel and carve out a carburetor because there were no parts available. And he had to, ingenuity is something else, you know, it's a, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
That is right. That is so true.
Yeah. So that's kind of a great way to start is telling your story. So my next question is, what life experience had the greatest impact on you?
Well, God, so many, but I'd have to say leaving Cuba for one, you know, and just coming to the US was, my life could have gone in so many other different directions. I would also say first time I fell in love. You know, I'd had a lot of sex as a teenager, but it was always this deep, dark secret. So I'd do my thing and then feel guilty for a couple of weeks. I grew up in a very Catholic environment. And I'll never forget my first time I kissed my first lover, because in that moment, it was the first time that I had really experienced love and sex together. And it was such a powerful combination that after that, there wasn't a priest or a minister or a rabbi or a psychiatrist or anybody that could tell me that it was wrong or that it was sinful or that it was a sickness. It was just so beautiful that it just made all the difference.
That's very sweet. And I wasn't that fortunate. I was much more lust-driven when I was younger. What would you say to anyone interested in an aspect of your experience? Meaning, if someone wanted to explore an idea or prospective opportunity based on what you can tell them, what would be the main thing to encourage or discourage them?
Well, I would say read this book, and read the earlier book too, right? Coming Out Spiritually, which has a particular message for the LGBTQ community. This one has a more universal message. It's about personal empowerment and why so many of us have an ambivalent relationship to power. We struggle with that. We want it, but we're afraid of it. We've been so conditioned to think that power is a negative thing, with phrases like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So combine that with the fact, and what they didn't tell us, by the way, about that is that that phrase specifically was talking about political power, not interpersonal power. Um, so put all that into a mix, combined with the fact that we have been conditioned to be afraid of the emotions and label them weakness. And so we hate confrontation, we avoid conflict. And so what happens when you put all of that together is we end up giving away our power. We end up selling out on our power for the illusion of security, for morsels of pseudo love, and for a false sense of acceptance.
It's funny too. I've always felt that many people who I met along the way, not all, but many people, being part of the gay community for as long as I have, is that initially when people come out, and it may last for some time, and it may last forever, is they tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to their own personal moral convictions. And it doesn't mean you can just be nihilistic and self-indulgent and not care about anybody else. It just means you're not beholden to very restrictive concepts that are making you feel less self-worth. And I think a lot of people don't explore that. And I think maybe that's tied to power.
Yeah, I think that's a really profound observation, Tim. I think that the upside of it, the gift of it, is that because so many of us grow up as outsiders, feeling like we're different, feeling like we don't belong, and less now, but still. Uh, so the downside of that is that we feel different. We feel like there's something wrong with us. We personalize it. We internalize it. The gift of it is that because we stand outside of the rules, outside of the system, we get to decide what the rules are. Right? We get to decide what's right and what's wrong for us, and it takes work. Like, because what you're saying is like so many of us do throw out the baby with the baptismal water, if you would, and then throw out any sense of ethics or morality along with that. Whereas what you're pointing to is that there are ways of deciding what's right and what's wrong and what's moral for each one of us that doesn't depend on teachings that were written and mistranslated and retranslated 2,000 years ago and taken out of their cultural and historical context.
I think that's quite true. I've done previous podcasts, several of them, and I've interviewed some people who have had terrible substance abuse issues, and part of also that structure of integrity of moral character. What happens in the gay community is almost threefold, possibly even more than threefold in terms of substance abuse compared to the straight community. Whereas the straight community has about 10 to 15% of people with serious substance abuse issues. The gay community tends to have 25 to 35% substance abuse issues. Gay men, believe it or not, are 10 times more likely than straight men to try heroin and 12 times more likely than straight men to use amphetamine, specifically methamphetamine. And this comes from some citations that I made in a few research pieces that I did. And I think it's because of self-value and self-worth, because there's no structure there. You're not thinking of what it means and what you can do and how you can contribute to your own well-being as well as other people's, and how that feedback positively impacts you. And I think we have a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is tragic. And I'm glad, not happy, but I'm glad to hear the more updated numbers that you've just provided. I mean, when I wrote Coming Out Spiritually 20 years ago, that was one of the things that drove that book. It's just the rate of suicide, the rate of addiction in our community, which I totally agree with you, comes from like the lack of self-worth, the self-hatred, the self-denial. And what's tragic about that is that many people confuse spirituality and religion. So we threw out the whole thing with bathwater, and that is just as ludicrous and tragic as trying to get rid of or deny our sexuality, right? These are just parts of being human, whether it's sexuality or spirituality, just part of who we are. And so because we confuse religion with spirituality, and no wonder, given the treatment that we have received, and by many religions, and I would say most, they're getting better at that too, and they're opening up to some degree. But so because of that treatment, we deny intrinsic parts of who we are. And what the theme of that book was is that the tragedy of that is that before patriarchal times, before patriarchal cultures, people that we today call LGBT or Q or whatever were not only spiritually inclined, but were actually honored and revered for the roles of spiritual service and spiritual leadership that we provided all over the world.
Yes, another part I did was surprisingly, I did not know this until I researched on this. The term homosexual wasn't coined until the late 19th century, and the application of the concept of homosexuality in Western culture is largely stolen and been appropriated. I'll say appropriated from a lot of it has to do with Native American culture, the Two-Spirit culture. And that was part of the rise of not only the end of the Victorian era, but also the fin de siècle, the end of the cycle, the end of the century, and an embrace of new. So that also got mixed in with tarot and seances and mediums, and it got jumbled in with a lot of stuff, and people had to do a little separation. But there has been some scholarly work on the subject, and we were embraced originally as part of a new way of looking and understanding of others, and somehow it became muddled, and somebody had taken, seizing the opportunity to separate and just make the distinction that they're the other that we have to save you from. But yes, that's part of a lot of the spirituality that rose from the end of the 19th century is the awareness of what we call the Two-Spirit in the Native American culture, and how that has applied to the awakening of a gay identity. So I think that's also very reflective and accurate from what you're saying. So yeah. After this, what would you say is your most noteworthy achievement?
This is a really good question. I would have to say I've been doing this kind of work, like personal transformation, coaching, and leading spiritual retreats for the last 30 years. It's a long time. And so if I were checking out of the planet today, if I got another assignment at another planet, I think what I would be most proud of is my own personal transformation, and all the stuff that I've overcome. Like my adolescence was one long depression with suicidal fantasies. And these days, no matter the circumstances of my life, a relationship works out or it doesn't, a project succeeds or it fails, in quotes, I never question my self-worth. And then so that transformation is what I've been able to share with so many people and help so many people over the last few decades get free and overcome their own personal obstacles to self-love and to self-acceptance and to having the kind of life and the kind of relationships that they long for.
Well, that kind of ties into the next question, because I think this probably does fit with it. The biggest personal challenge you have faced now, as a motivating factor or some other component, a personal injury, a seemingly overwhelming task, a personal or professional goal, a difficult situation you had to overcome?
Here's one example that's very relatable too. I always had a sense of mission. I always knew that I had work to do, which showed up in different ways at different points in my life. at the time when I was in high school, I went to a very Catholic high school, and I thought I was going to be a priest. So obviously realized that there wasn't room for me in that religion. Um, but I was so painfully shy. I was okay one-on-one, but if you added a third human, I clammed up. To the degree, Tim, that I had a 4.0 in high school, except for 1B my last semester. And I didn't do this intentionally, consciously, but I know from current perspective that I sabotaged that so that I wouldn't have to get up in front of an auditorium with hundreds of people and give a valedictorian speech. There is just no way that I would have been ready to do that then. And so the fact that I'm now a public speaker, the fact that I speak all over the world, the fact that I'm a TEDx speaker and speak to thousands of people is also a great evidence to the teachings that I share in this book, and the way that I can guide people to overcome their own fears and their own ways, their own, to get free from their own self-imposed prisons of the mind.
So this also fits, I think, really great. Based on that, what would you say was the transformational moment in your life? A meaningful gift, a reason to belong to something, being a parent, good job, bad job, an experience that helped catalyst, kickstart your change?
Yeah, man, you ask really good questions. I would have to point, the one that pops into mind now is the first time that I did breath work over 30 years ago. And I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. And when I discovered breath work, which is a type of breathing modality that comes out of the yoga tradition, and you breathe in a certain way for about an hour and a half, that experience was so powerful that I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD. Because it heals so profoundly in so many ways, at so many levels. I don't know anything more effective in terms of healing past trauma. And I'm talking about, I work with people who have severe trauma, rape and sexual abuse and violent crimes. And this simple breathing practice heals that stuff. And it heals emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even physically, on top of providing for people some amazing, ecstatic experiences of bliss and oneness and connectedness. And I know this sounds too good to be true. To my logical, scientific, skeptical mind, it still sounds too good to be true, even 30 years into it. But, Tim, I can't argue with results. It works. And it works fast.
I can't disagree. I've done a lot of reading on Buddhism and breathing principles and how to clear your mind and breathe. And it doesn't do anything less than give you a sense of tranquility. So if you start from there, you're doing a lot better than you were in a little turbulence in your life. So I have to absolutely agree. Because you have transformed your life and you've done so much, what drives you? What gets you up in the morning?
It's that same sense of mission that I was just talking about. And to paraphrase, this is how I think of it. To paraphrase Einstein, you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. So when I look at the world and all the challenges that we face that sometimes feel overwhelming, like what am I going to do about terrorism? What am I going to do about the environmental crisis? So sometimes it feels like there is so much that I think, you know what, I'm just going to go to the beach and have a lot of sex and eat a lot of dark chocolate. And then I reel myself back and I say, okay, chill out, dude. What can I do personally? And then I think, all right, what can I do? I can continue to help myself heal and wake up, and I can help as many people to do the same. So when I think about the situation that we find ourselves in as a species, and how are we going to dig ourselves out of this hole that we have collectively dug ourselves into? I go back to Einstein. I say it's got to be a leap in consciousness. It's got to be. We have to think outside of the box. To me, it's like a spiritual revolution that's going to shift the way that we think about ourselves and how we relate to each other and how we relate to the earth and to the cosmos. To me, that's a spiritual revolution, a revolution in thinking. So my job, as I see it now, what drives me, what gets me up in the morning, is how can I support that process?
Very good. Now, because of that answer, what is the first thing you want to come to people's minds when they think of you?
You know, I think to paraphrase what you were asking me earlier, is like, what is my greatest gift? Like, if I were going to think legacy, I would think my capacity to love and the depth of my surrender.
Could you explain that?
Yeah. We have a confusing relationship to surrender from the spiritual perspective. Because to us, it feels like we're giving power away. We're like giving up. We are throwing in the white towel. Whereas my experience of it, the way that I hold it and understand it, it's the opposite. It's a very empowering experience, which connects to part of one of the themes in this book about personal empowerment is understanding what the ego mind is. And what identity is. So the ego, for most of us, it means, we think arrogance, we think inflated sense of self, and it is that, but it's so much more than that. And then if we took Psych 101 in college, we might think, Freud's model of personality, the id, the ego, the superego, and that's not what I'm talking about. There's things that apply, but the way that I'm talking about the ego comes out of Eastern teachings. And it's a sense of personal identity. It's a part of us, a part of the psyche that weaves in sensory information. It can reach into the past, it can project into the future, and somehow weaves all of that into a coherent sense of self, like a sense of individual personality. This is Christian, you're 10, right? So it's both a leap in consciousness. As far as we know, we're the only species that has a sense of self. There's some theories about the higher primates and the dolphins and the whales and the elephants, but we don't really know. We don't really know. Like, there's a difference. For example, when you put a dog or a cat in front of a mirror, we've seen the YouTube videos, they interact with that image as if it was another dog or a cat. If you put, they've done studies where you put a higher primate, a chimp or gorilla, in front of a mirror, and you put ash on their shoulder, at some point they'll wipe it off. So something else is going on. Like, they know that's not them, that's not a different creature, but whether we can leap from there to a sense of self, I don't think we can do that. So leap in consciousness and the source of all our suffering and all our problems, because in human evolution, we haven't always had a sense of self, according to the experts who write about this stuff. So when we develop that sense of individual identity, what happened? Now we have a split in consciousness. Now we feel separate from all of creation. Now we can have abandonment issues, like so many of us do. Now we can have a sense of our own mortality. So there's definitely a price to pay for having a sense of individual identity. Here's a great metaphor. What the ego is, if you think of a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny, tiny part of who we are to think that it is all who we are, and to make really significant, important, critical, and consequential choices about our lives from its very small and always fear-based perspective. So on this journey of personal empowerment, it's critical that we understand how that part of us works, so that we no longer allow ourselves to give our power away to that and to play small.
Well, I cannot disagree with that either. I think that that's probably one of the biggest motivators for most people, is reacting to fear. And It's something that people just turn their heads and close their eyes and shudder and don't even want to contemplate. And most fear is something that if you stand up to it, it just withers and disintegrates in front of you. And we tend to make a mountain out of a molehill, and people fashion most of their conscious lives to avoid things that cause them to fear or whatever analog of fear there is. And it's tragic, but it's also how people, unfortunately, how a lot of people learn. Uh, so I see by the statue of the head, the bust behind you. My next question should be a good follow up to that is, what is your Zen?
So we should say that I have a Buddha behind me. Um, You know, what makes me the way that I would understand is what makes me pop out of that self-reflective consciousness, right? What makes me pop out of the thinking mind, which is the ego mind, and what pops me into just beingness. I think several things do. I can use conscious breathing practices to do that, or conscious mindfulness, or meditation, or breathing practices to help me pop out of that and just pop into that Zen place of being and pure awareness. The other thing that does that is lovemaking. Before I knew practices like meditation, like breath work, before I knew about any of this, and before I knew about the ego, the only time that I popped out of my mind and that I popped into just beingness was in the midst of lovemaking. That's when I was able to really connect with somebody else in the deepest way, and those barriers that keep us separate most of the time just fell away.
That's quite an observation, I must say. The next question is going to be a bit of a departure, and it's something that I've gotten very wide variety of responses for. It's the last of my 10 questions, and it is this. It is the threshold. And the threshold is the point in your life where you know there is no turning back. The wall has not only been built up behind you, it's been painted over. You can't even tell there was ever anything you came through anymore. You cannot possibly go back. There's a point to it. I think just about everybody knows that. How did you know when you arrived there? How did it feel to cross it? What was the significance to you? And what did you leave behind? What are you glad you left behind? And what do you regret leaving behind? Tough question, I know.
Tough. I mean, you have amazing questions that we could talk about for hours, Tim.
Yeah.
Well, I think one was the first one that I talked about when I fell in love, and when I just decided that I was no longer going to hide. So that was like the first point of integrating myself, right? Of reclaiming different parts of my rejected humanity. The second one was 10 years later when I first experienced breath work, and that experience and understood what the ego mind was. And I had a pretty enviable life at those points. I had a cushy job. I had a condo on the water, on the bay, down here in Miami, Miami Beach at the time where I was living. Had a beautiful lover, had the Armani suits, sought after socially, sought after professionally. And it seemed to be me that the more that I had, the more that there was something missing. Because I discovered eventually that I had rejected this whole other part of being human, my spiritual nature, which I tried to ignore, for a good 10 years, as I focused on my personal life and redefining myself post coming out, and developing myself professionally and all that. So once I had that experience, and that expanding hole in my gut began to fill, then I started learning about traditions of the East, about these transformative psychology, psycho-spiritual concepts. Within 9 months of that first experience of breathwork, I quit my job, sold my condo, broke up with a boyfriend, um, sold my car, gave away most of my belongings except for my books and my Armani suits. So that tells you a little bit about my attachments. And I went off on a spiritual journey. Never. That was the last time I ever worked for anybody else, for a corporation. Never looked back, and no regrets. Like no regrets. It's like, oh my God, that was like probably the biggest turning point in my life, and because of that, it's who I am today, and the sense of freedom and personal empowerment and self-acceptance and self-love and sense of purpose, sense of meaning. It's like I wouldn't trade that for anything. What I left behind, there were most of the relationships that mattered came along with me, even though in the beginning it was difficult because people thought I was joining a cult. People thought that I was crazy to give up everything, that everything that I was giving up. People didn't understand. There were a couple of relationships that didn't make it. Most of them are. Most of the ones that counted are here. But there were a few that just didn't transition with me.
I can understand that. I had a very, very similar experience in my life. And, the people in my life who my transformation to opening up into becoming who I am never mattered to them in the first place. And they were with me the entire time. So other people, if it's conditional and it's, the conditions that they're imposing aren't really worth it, then, you're just going to, I think, more or less drift apart from each other. And then you'll realize that that's not really a valid relationship any longer.
Exactly.
So we've come to the end of my 10 questions. Did you select 10 questions for yourself, or would you like to go through the list?
I've kind of woven some of them in terms of talking about the book, understanding what the ego mind is. I think that's when I think about what would most serve your audience, those would be the type of questions that I would go for.
Okay, well, let's see. Now, I have a question that I think people like to answer questions. And I have questions, everything from what's your favorite weather to what's your favorite color, because everybody needs a softball here and there. Obviously, what is your first goal when interacting with strangers?
Well, it depends on who the stranger is, right? But I would say fun. I was kind of kidding there. But obviously, if it was somebody that I was really interested in physically, with whom I had chemistry, then I might have a different intention. But half kidding there. I would say my main intention when I meet anybody, and eventually once I got past the physical chemistry and the biochemical attraction, I think I would ultimately land here anyway, because I wouldn't consider being in relationship with anybody if I didn't really know their essence, right? So that's what I want to know when I meet somebody. It's like, who are you really? It's like, not so much interested in what you do and what your sign is, though of course we'll talk about that. But I want to know the essence. I want to know what turns people on spiritually, right? Like, what gets them excited about life? I want to know, who they are and their most real, deepest, most authentic self.
Okay, now there's a question that how do you know when you have connected with somebody?
No, I think you feel that.
You just feel so?
I think you feel it. Yeah, I think we all feel that. And it's hard to speak about it. We are energetic beings. We tend to think of the body as solid, but we know from physics that it's not. We know we are literally energetic beings. And so I think the more that we become fine-tuned to what that means, the more that we feel and can connect with and respond to each other's energy. In the beginning, before we have the languaging for that, we just get a gut feeling, right? I like this person, I don't. I can trust this person, I don't really feel there's something, this one that, creeps me out or whatever. The more aware that we become of ourselves as energy beings, the more that we can tune in to what those connections are. And even where, is it a heart connection? Is it something else? Is it more of a genital connection, energetic center connection? So maybe that was too much for that question.
That's okay. This is an adult podcast. So considering everything is so, you have such a tremendous deep connection and background to spirituality, and you have an embrace of a lot of Eastern thoughts. Tell me about your nadir.
What do you mean by nadir? I know you mean the lowest point, but what is?
Yes. What do you personally consider your lowest point
in life?
Yeah.
Man, you are making me think this morning. My lowest point. Well, I think, I guess I have to go back to my adolescence and just my inability to deal with my sexuality, because it was all being filtered through this religion in which I was trying to live, and which had no space for me at the time. Religion here, part of me wanted to serve the sacred as I understood it then. And the religion was telling me that I was going to burn to hell for eternity. That I was anathema in the eyes of God. And I remember when I was young, because I knew very young that I was gay. And I remember asking a priest one time, well, how long is eternity exactly?
Yeah.
And being on an island, he used an appropriate metaphor. He goes, well, imagine you go to the beach and you have a thimble with you, and you start taking water out of the ocean with a thimble. That's eternity, which of course terrified me. Because to put things in context, masturbation is still considered a mortal sin in Catholicism. I mean, most priests don't hold people to that and don't guilt people over the head with that. But technically, it's still a mortal sin, which means that if you die having committed a mortal sin and you haven't received confession from a priest, in Catholicism, you can't do it directly. But it has to be, you have to receive absolution from a priest.
Correct.
So if that hasn't happened, you go to hell for eternity. So that was masturbation. Not to mention the unmentionable, quote unquote, sin that I was worried about.
That's interesting. I had a Catholic background, and I went to a Catholic all-boys high school, and it was run by an order that seems somewhat disconnected, but I found out that a number of them are a lot more human.
Yeah. Which order was it?
The Marianists, Society of Mary. They run a number of schools in New York. They even have one in Hawaii, and there was one in Santa Cruz, California, which I think they sold, and it's now a conference center. But I think there's also one in Dayton, Ohio. They, I think, are individuals, but it was priests and brothers, and I had my own issues with sexual assault, and of course I was mistaken, and I was lying, and they're very nice people. They come from lovely families, and I'm using this as an excuse for not being a better student. And I remember the volatile change, the eruptive volatile change in disposition when I attempted to broach the subject. They went from very calm and reflective and spiritual to just Jekyll and Hyde, and how it was so difficult for me. So I was battered down, and I couldn't even address the issues, and there was nobody in my life who wanted to or was receptive to my struggle. So I kept that internalized for quite some time.
I'm so sorry you went through that, Tim. How old were you?
14.
14.
And it was repeated, and it was gang sexual assault, and I knew the leader of the pack, and I knew him already, which was a strange thing. And it was I happened to be walking down hallway after school, staying after school because that's what you were encouraged to do. And I was yanked into my own homeroom and surrounded by 5 boys. And this is not the first time it happened. That was the first time, but it happened on a number of occasions afterwards. So everything I said was absolutely an outrageous accusation and a lie. And I couldn't have been correct. And, there was just a number of changes in response but none of them were accommodating or understanding or accepting or believing me. So I felt isolated, and it took me quite some time, and I did my own therapeutic care and some research on my own, and I came to a number of conclusions. And of course, growing up, I live in Chelsea, New York. I've been here for quite some time. There's been a gay bar next door to us on and off for years. And right down the block was a St. Vincent de Paul church, which has since closed because it was mostly holding mass for people who spoke French. And the majority of the people who would come, they were Haitian. And there wasn't a large enough of a community to sustain the church. But while the church was going down, the happy hour at the bar next door was full of priests. So you'd sit there and you walk in and you go, there's 3 to 5 priests in a happy hour. So obviously, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, I totally empathize with you, and my heart goes out to you. I went to an all-boy Jesuit high school.
Renegade Catholics.
Yeah. And I can relate to your experience of having been sexually abused. In my case, it wasn't a priest; it was somebody else, a relative. But connecting to the response that you had from the priests, that's the reason that explains the sex scandals, because sexual energy, just like any other kind of energy, cannot be destroyed. So we suppress it over here, we try to stuff it and hide it, then it pops up over there, mostly inappropriately.
Yes, it does. And I used to look at these guys, I looked them in the eye, and I just say, how do you reconcile being here in a gay bar, flirting with and becoming physical to whatever degree it was permitted in the actual bar, and then go back, 300 feet and hold a mass, or serve mass, or as it's called. And there is some sort of mental gymnastics that they do, and I am not interested in trying to decipher or deconstruct what they're saying, because ultimately it's just winds up to a dead end thinking anyway, and which is surprising considering the amount of time people spend doing spiritual education and pursuing their what they think is their calling and connection to a higher purpose. So I don't know how they divorce that or how they can reconcile that. I've never been able to understand that, but I'll let them to deal with that themselves. I have, as I always say, I said, finish ruining your own life before you start ruining someone else's. So I'm not going to get involved in someone else who didn't ask me to help them figure out what I think is their problem. So
and I totally agree. And what I would like to say for your audience, that if they haven't yet reconciled their own spirituality and their own sexuality, is that there is a way to do that. Right? There is a way to do that, and there are ways of expressing both of those in a way that are a match for who we are. And the same thing too in relationship to our personal power. Like, we don't have to give it away. We don't have to suppress it. We don't have to act as if. We don't have to sell out on our power. There are ways of expressing it that are a match for who we are, that don't require us for us to abuse it, that don't require for us to push anybody down, step on them, put our knee to their neck in order for us to prop ourselves up and feel powerful.
So, and part of this, and I know this is part and parcel of the entire thing, but what is your quest? What must you see through in life? What do you have to get above all else? What is the thing you must do at one point in life above all else?
You know, I think it's the same for all of us, but it certainly is for me. Like, to me, the only thing I think, I know at least you and I have lived long enough to know. I don't know about your audience and the makeup of your audience, but I know you and I have lived long enough to know that there isn't any relationship out there that's going to fulfill us, that there isn't anyone out there that's going to make us happy. And how unfair to put that responsibility on somebody else. That's so actually it's if we want to have a relationship to have a chance of working, that to me that's a primary realization, like that, to realize that only we can make ourselves happy. Then if we meet somebody else that we can share a life with, then great, right? But without that heaviness and that responsibility that the relationship is going to make us happy, what does make us happy then? For me, at least, I think for most of us, but I can't speak for all of us, so I speak for myself. It's giving expression to our unique human potential, and I mean full expression. Like there isn't anybody out there that has the same kind of genetics, the same kind of experiences that make each one of us unique. So if we don't give expression to that uniqueness, ain't nobody else gonna do it. And I think that's where the fulfillment is. So we can talk about life purpose. And a great exemplar for me is I'm blanking on his name right now, the Austrian psychiatrist whom I reference in every retreat as referencing my book.
That's
Viktor,
right.
Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl. Oh, I love Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl, who spent years in concentration.
Man's search for himself. Man's search for meaning.
Man's search for meaning. I actually got to hear him speak.
Did you really?
When I was in advanced placement psychology in high school, and I feel really, blessed to have had that experience.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because that guy was able to, like, they took everything away from him, like everything, lost everybody, including his pregnant wife, soulmate kind of relationship. And so being a psychiatrist, he would ponder and question why some people seemed to survive and others didn't. And what he landed on was that it had nothing to do with intelligence or education or beauty or physical strength or where you came from or socioeconomic status. None of that seemed to make a difference in there. And so what he landed on, the people who seemed to survive were the ones who had a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. And so hence that book, Man's Search for Meaning. And so that's my experience too. That's where I land. Like who are we really? Right. So that's the necessity to really go dive deep inside and to figure out who we are, and ask the hard questions, and then get really clear about what we're doing here.
It's funny. The funniest thing about it is that I read that at my Catholic all-boys high school.
Me too.
And I wouldn't have been enlightened, but I did that, and that stuck with me for my entire life. So, what should everybody know about you?
Man, you keep asking me hard questions. And already, like, I've revealed, I think, a lot of my authentic self. And what drives me. and my, what I value and my legacy. Um, I guess that I'm available for love.
Okay. So then what is your baseline criteria for satisfaction?
Are you talking about in life in general or in a relationship or what?
What if you had to set a standard for what is a definition in your internal definition of what satisfaction is? What would be the baseline criteria? Would it be someone, is it? I know it's probably it's most likely not, but is it physical? Is it something that affects your self-esteem? What is, or is it some financial? It could be anything to a number of people. I asked people what got them up in the morning, and some people told me coffee.
So you're talking about satisfaction in general, not just in relationships.
How you define it.
Okay. Well, I think I've addressed that too. I think it's a sense of purpose, right? So the sense of connection, of connectedness, and to me that means first of all connected to myself, which is what makes like a real deep connection with another possible. And feeling connected to something greater than myself, whether you call that nature or life or love or the universe or whatever you call it. When I feel off center, that means that one of those is not in place. Either I haven't spent enough quality time with myself, like if I'm on too much, if I've been traveling too much and I haven't had enough time alone with myself, that's when I tend to go off center. Yeah.
Okay. I think if you said just a few more questions, and I think based on that, what do you say is the biggest boost to your self-esteem?
That's one of the ways in which I define and experience personal freedom, is that I thankfully, because I certainly know the alternative, I thankfully no longer need external validation. Right? So like I know who I am, and I know my worth, and I know what I'm good at, and I know where I excel, and I know where I'm challenged. I do know those things. So that, and when somebody's life is changed because of my work, because they came to one of my retreats, or because even just reading my book, that's what gives me the deepest satisfaction.
So your strongest priority?
At this point in my life, reaching as many people as possible with my message of self-acceptance and self-empowerment.
Okay. Now,
and I see this book, by the way, as a call to action, right? Because it's kind of like all hands on deck time as far as I'm concerned. I think the planet's going to be fine. It might take a few million years, but life will continue in some form. Life will find homeostasis again. Maybe it turns out to be an intelligent and conscious cockroach planet. Who knows? Whether we make it, right? We're just now beginning to witness whatever it is that we have unleashed on the environment, of which COVID is a symptom, right? COVID is a symptom of our relationship to nature. And
so they say, a number of well-informed intelligentsia saying it is a symptom of a greater malaise.
Yeah.
Just seeing it right now. Yes.
And even the environment, it's as you could say, it's a symptom of the environment, the way we're treating the environment.
Yes.
And so if we focus it from that perspective, COVID can be of huge service. It can be a huge wake-up call. And the mandatory global timeout, if we hold it in the right way, is like, what a service. What a service, just to have a pause in which we can all go in and ask the hard questions that you've been asking me.
Well, I'm gonna end it with the two relative softballs. Um, uh, let's see. Tell me about your relationship with the animal kingdom.
Hmm. I'm not I don't have a pet, because up until a year ago, I was spent too much time on a plane. I do have a really profound relationship with a peacock. Where I live in Miami, there's a flock of wild peacocks, and probably, I don't know, 40, 50 of them. Um, and there's one that comes, kind of has taken, has kind of claimed my land, or when I rent, it's not my land, but where I live, as its territory. Um, and I used to think, oh my God, I've got him tamed. Like, he eats out of my hands. Now I've got three of them who eat out of my hands. But this one in particular, like, so I used to think that until I realized that other than me being on a phone call or being in the middle of a retreat or something, like, I can hear him call, or he'll come peck on the window, and I drop everything. I drop whatever I'm doing and I go feed him. So who's got who trained?
Yes. I actually was very friendly with an elephant at the Bronx Zoo, who's a very celebrated elephant. They're trying to give it her a change of environment. And I went to Fordham University for several years, and I used to go to the Bronx Zoo all the time. I was just a few blocks away. Just in the southeast corner of where Fordham is located is next to Fordham is Bronx Botanical Gardens. Just the other side of the road is the Bronx Zoo, and the rest of it is the Little Italy of the Bronx. And I lived there when I was going to school. Go to the zoo, and I would see an elephant every single day. Huh. And I used to feed her potato chips, and all the other people would come by and they'd ooh and ah, and the elephant she'd come right over to me, and she'd let me pet her trunk, which I don't know if you know, elephant hairs are like wires, and they have 40,000 muscles in their trunks, and they're very sensitive, and it's a phenomenal thing. And the elephant will look you in the eye, and you look in that elephant eye, and you know there's something behind there. And of course, I left school and I hadn't come back, and I didn't come back for about 7 years to visit, and I never realized that you have a relationship with this animal, and you should keep up. So I went back, and I went there one day with somebody, and we walk up to the elephants, and there's a bunch of people, and what do you know? She just stops what she's doing. She sees me, comes right over to me, gives me the big nod and the smile, and I give her, and she lets me pet her, and everyone thinks I'm an animal trainer because I had known her. So she had me trained, but also it's something else when you do connect with an animal you don't expect to, especially something that's not domestic. Because I'm a cat lover, and I love dogs and cats and all that stuff, but not knowing that you could actually have some sort of, it's almost like a communal experience. Yeah. Because you've connected on a level that's not intellectual, and it's physical in the sense that you're making physical contact, but there's something else there, and I think that's something else.
I love that. You get me chills with that story.
Oh, and it was just one of those things that I very fondly remember telling the story, because people say that there's largely been discredited, and the idea that elephants don't always remember. I said, well, I don't know about you, but this elephant didn't forget me. And she was very, very sweet and loving. And I just remember looking into her and knowing there's something there. It's not just an animal she knows something. That changed my perception about my relationship to the animal kingdom and to people, because it's your sense of humanity and how humane you are helps define how you treat other people, I think, anyway.
So, I love that story. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you. Now I think maybe I just give you one last question, because I love putting this out. What is your favorite weather?
My favorite weather. This time of year, Miami is not bad at all. We're in the middle to high 70s. It's just beautiful. And blue skies almost every day, everything lush and green. I lived in California too, in Northern California for 20 years, and I like that weather too. I love that. The fact that it cools off at night and hot tubs make a lot more sense over there than they do here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the snow, but to visit. I don't want to live in a cold climate.
Okay.
I'm from the tropics. What can I say?
All right. Well, that's the end. I think I'll do a count backwards, but I'm pretty sure that covers a lot of ground because we meshed a lot of questions in together anyway. So that's the end of our 20 questions. And Christian, I thank you so very much for being a guest. And I'm going to end as I always end, is saying thank you again, and see you next time. And as the kiddies say, peace out.